Good afternoon. I'm Michelle Moore. I'm the Federal Environmental Executive at the President's Council on Environmental Quality, and I'm thrilled to be here to talk with you this afternoon and take your questions about the Green Gov Challenge and the Federal Executive Order on Sustainability.
I'm Christine Glunz. I'm the Communications Director at the White House Council on Environmental Quality, and we are happy to get started. Taking your questions, the first one comes from Brian Matthew Keating, who wants to know, what's the topic today for discussion?
So today we launched the Green Gov Challenge, and what it does is engages federal personnel and military personnel everywhere to contribute their collective wisdom to share ideas and vote on the best ideas for how to green the government. And these are ideas that will be implemented to help support an executive order that the President signed on Monday, October the 5th on sustainability in the federal government.
Great. So our next question comes from Michael Buchko Jr., and he wants to know, how much does this cost? How much will it cost in the long run? Or if it doesn't cost, how much will it potentially save?
So the executive order is really focused on leadership by example, and part of leading by example is demonstrating that environmental performance really helps to achieve very positive economic results as well. So we're confident that implementing these ideas is ultimately going to save money for the taxpayer. And a great example is if you look at energy use. So the federal government is the biggest energy consumer in the entire U.S. economy. Last year, we spent nearly $25 billion on energy. So everything that we do to save energy, to be more energy efficient, and ultimately to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions is also going to result in benefits to the taxpayer over time.
Great. I have another question from someone who's wondering, oftentimes when we hear the word military, we don't tend to think green. What has the military done? What has the Department of Defense done in this effort to go green? I know they've been a great example, both the Department of Defense and the VA. So what steps have they taken exactly? So
military services, DOD at large, and as Christine shared, the Veterans Administration have all been doing a lot to lead. There may not just be ideas that have made the front page of your hometown paper yet. Just to give you a few examples, only 2 weeks ago, VA announced that as a part of their Recovery Act projects, they would be installing an American-made windmill to generate wind energy for one of their facilities in St. Cloud. And if you think about the Department of Defense, all of the branches of service, Marines, Navy, Army, Air Force, have done a really extraordinary job of linking sustainability and particular conservation as it relates to energy directly to their mission. There's a great publication online, if you're interested, actually called More Fight, Less Fuel that helps to articulate that agenda. And whether you're talking about extraordinary performance in sustainable buildings at Fort Hood in Texas, or down in the Carolinas using recycled plastics to make bridges that are used temporarily over creeks and rivers so that military vehicles can operate in well, shall we say just areas that don't have roads. There are wonderful, wonderful examples throughout the DoD community of leadership and sustainability.
Okay, great. I have another question about why is this only federal and military personnel? What about the rest of the population? So this effort is just for federal employees, right?
Right. So federal employees and military personnel are all invited to share their ideas and vote on the best ideas for the Green Gov Challenge, but actually all members of the public are able to see those ideas. And the reason that we're really seeking to engage the federal community is because what our focus here is federal operations. How can we really lead by example and leverage what is $500 billion a year in federal purchasing of goods and services to help create a clean energy economy and really build on the momentum of the Recovery Act. So we look forward to hearing what their ideas for how to change the way that we're working and be more sustainable, not only here in Washington, but throughout the field. And we're happy to hear the ideas and questions that you all have for us here today.
Great. We have another question from Sudhir, who wants to know, will we be approaching this on a systemic and holistic approach to greening the government? Or?
Absolutely. One of the fundamental principles that we had when we began to approach this idea was integrated planning. So we worked with all of the departments and agencies, not only who have unique operational footprints, some of them own a lot of buildings, some of them own a lot of land, but they all have unique ideas to share as well. And just like the great examples that we've seen coming from corporations in the private sector who've really embraced sustainability, embraced integrated thinking, and help to not only drive great environmental results but also demonstrate economic benefits, we want to recognize those same ideas in how we approach sustainability in the federal government as well. Thinking integrated planning, systems thinking, and breaking down the silos that tend to ultimately cost money over time.
Great. We have a question from Brent Stokes out of Omaha, Nebraska, who wants to know why should this even be an issue? We're talking about controlling government spending or other areas.
Well, like all change, it has to be deliberate. And in thinking about how to approach change as well as it relates to becoming more sustainable and more cost-effective as a federal government, you think about the scale of our operations. So just civilian personnel, we have 1.8 million employees. We own nearly 500,000 buildings, more than 600,000 vehicles, and spend a little north of $500 billion a year. So to think about where can we best invest, where's the low-hanging fruit to be able to really drive energy efficiency that's going to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and save money, for instance, you have to be deliberate about that. Not only because of the integrated thinking that needs to take place, but also just the scale and the size and the spread of the organization that we're looking to change.
Great. Angie Vernon Wallace wants to know, what are different things that Americans can do at home?
So there's some great examples actually, and some of those examples were actually talked about at an event earlier today that launched the Recovery Through Retrofit initiative.
That's right.
And you can begin, and I know this sounds very simple, but if you haven't done it already, changing your light bulbs. Oftentimes, changing from conventional incandescent bulbs can save up to 70% of the lighting component of your electricity bill. If you have a programmable thermostat, absolutely use it. And once you've done those things that you can do yourself as a homeowner related to energy, especially going into the winter months, that's where the greatest savings are going to be associated with having a more sustainable lifestyle. Then another great step to take would be to get an energy audit. And an energy audit will help you understand where you could invest in weatherization or maybe other changes in your home that are not only going to make your lifestyle more sustainable, but will ultimately put dollars back in your pocket. And there are other ideas that are shared in the executive order as well that would also apply to homeowners, like using low VOC or less toxic cleaning products or paints or other materials in your home. Lots of wonderful ideas out there that are very easy to undertake and that ultimately have savings associated for the household as well.
That's great. We have another question from Nancy Craig, who wants to know, what does the federal government do with old computers and electronics? We have a recycling program that I think you know about, right?
Yeah, absolutely. We've actually been going through that here recently as well. So the federal government has a very comprehensive program actually that takes old computers, and if the computers are new enough and they would still be useful, the hard drives are wiped clean, and those get donated to elementary schools and other kinds of community organizations. And if not just the computers, but other electronic equipment like printers and copiers are not able to be reused by a different owner, we actually have a recycling program in place that takes everything from those computers, then can be recycled and puts it back into a manufacturing stream, or for materials in the computers or other electronic equipment that can't be reused and can't be recycled. We have a program in place to make sure that those are responsibly disposed of. And that is actually a really great example of ideas that come in from the grassroots, from within the federal community, that really work. The Federal Electronics Challenge actually came to Washington from the field. So we look forward to having a lot more of those great ideas coming in through the challenge that we're launching today as well.
Great. Well, we've been having some great questions come in. So Chris Glasner from Washington, D.C. wants to know, what are the key metrics that the government will be using to track progress on these goals?
So there are a few of them. One that's new for the federal government in terms of performance is actually looking at what our greenhouse gas emissions reductions are. And in the new executive order, federal agencies are required to measure, reduce, and report greenhouse gas emissions. So there'll be a transparency component that'll allow us to have public accountability for our performance as well. There are also a number of measures that we're already looking at and have actually been in place since about 2003. So we track our energy consumption. It's called energy intensity, actually. We track energy efficiency per square foot of building space. We're requiring performance on petroleum reduction, 2% reduction per year, a total of 30% reduction in the petroleum that we consume by 2030. We're tracking water efficiency, sort of waste diversion and recycling. And we're also keeping score on how we do in terms of green purchasing. Sort of going back to that $500 billion plus that the federal government spends on goods and services every year, we can be the kind of customer that helps to turn a really good entrepreneurial idea into a great American enterprise that's creating jobs. So understanding how the federal government, through its own operations, is helping to support great new clean tech companies, for instance, is another thing that we want to keep track of.
Great. Our next question is coming from Brenda Garcia, and she wants to know, is this executive order replacing the previous executive order?
It's actually building on the previous executive order. So the previous executive order was EO 13423, and it had a lot of ideas in it about sustainable buildings and energy efficiency, and we really used that effort and the great results that the community of federal employees have been achieving along those lines as the foundation on which we built to go further.
Great. We have another question from Noma Chaplin, who wants to know, what is going on with the energy efficiency program?
So the energy efficiency program, I'm assuming that you mean the requirements that the federal government has for improving the energy efficiency of its own buildings.
That's right.
So the federal government has actually been performing really well. We've exceeded the goals that we have so far of reducing energy intensity, that's energy efficiency per square foot, improving that by 3% every year, and almost every federal agency has met that target. And the fact that we have that kind of track record, and even more importantly, that we have excellent, knowledgeable experts and professionals in the field who understand how to get that kind of performance, is part of the reason that we're going to be able to be successful in achieving the goals of the new executive order, looking at greenhouse gas emissions and other aspects of sustainability and how we perform.
Great. So I know you're in contact with a lot of the federal agencies throughout the entire federal government. We have a question from Joanna Smith, who is from New York, New York.
Okay.
She wants to know, are there any plans for green roofs on federal buildings? I know some of the federal buildings already have that underway. Could you talk about that?
Yeah, absolutely. Green roofs are definitely part of the solution, and they're called out specifically in the executive order, actually. And right here in Washington, D.C., in the new Coast Guard headquarters that are being built, and we'll have the largest green roof in the entire area. And I'm sure that you'll see more of that particular solution around the federal agencies as well, particularly in places like Washington, D.C. or New York City, where helping to capture some of the rainwater that falls is part of a solution, not only to keeping the building cooler and creating a really beautiful aesthetic impression to people who may be looking down or looking across at the roof, but it also helps to manage stormwater.
Great. We keep getting great questions in, so keep it up. I have another question from Sudhir, who wants to know who conducts the energy audits and tracks these metrics that you've been mentioning. I know you have counterparts or people who are working in the agencies throughout. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So there are a couple of groups. So number one, there's an organization at DOE called FEMP. It's the Federal Energy Management Program. And they also have responsibilities across the federal government to track performance, how we're doing in energy efficiency, and they also help to manage energy performance contracts, which is one way that the federal government and also the private sector invests in sort of capital improvement projects, more major renovations like new air conditioning systems, for instance, that help make buildings much more efficient. You also have a new role that's being defined at a lot of especially large federal installations, and in some cases in senior levels within the agencies, as energy managers. For instance, Department of Defense has an operational energy director that is an open slot right now, and each of the agencies have people who are specifically charged with this. And if you can imagine an organization that spends $25 billion a year on energy, being able to keep track of how we're using that resource, and not only from a physical management perspective, but also thinking about our national energy security, is an area that's getting a lot more attention, not only here at the Council on Environmental Quality, but also at installations throughout the field.
Great. So we have another question out of Washington, and you were just talking about the energy managers. I think this coincides well, leading to our next question from Chris Glasner out of Washington, D.C. What incentives are being considered to help middle management adopt green programs or green practices across the federal government?
So there are a couple of ideas that are being discussed, but ultimately these are ideas that the agencies themselves would be implementing. Number one, there already and will continue to be a series of awards programs. We have one coming up actually at the end of this month, the Presidential Awards for Energy, that recognize extraordinary leadership, not only of individuals, but also on the part of teams at agencies who drive the kind of performance that we want to see. There are also encouragement in the executive order to look at training programs and other kinds of incentives that would recognize extraordinary achievement. Ultimately, at the agency level, there are also some good examples of successful programs. Going back to DOD and the example that they're helping to set, DOD has a program specifically that invests in energy conservation, and DOD is actually able to retain their energy savings to be able to reinvest in more energy efficiency projects, which helps make it more sustainable as a program over time too.
Great. We have a question out of Inland Empire, California. Victoria Wolf wants to know, are we going to see more brainstorming sessions? She says she loves that idea.
I hope so. I think that'd be fantastic. I actually had the opportunity to visit with the Federal Executive Board a couple of weeks ago in Northern California, and there were a lot of great ideas that came out of that session. And just like the Green Gov Challenge overall, we know that there's extraordinary ideas, extraordinary expertise, and the next big thing that can help us really transcend the performance goals that we've set for ourselves in this executive order from the community all over this country. So we're really looking to lots more of those brainstorming ideas, picking up ideas that would not only be helpful and implementable at the local level, but that would be ideas that we could share and share across the agencies as well.
I know you have the answer to this question. It comes from Brenda Garcia, and she's wondering, is there a website where we can learn more about these environmental indicators you're sharing about today?
Absolutely. Two things. First, you can go to whitehouse.gov and look for the executive order that we're talking about. It's Executive Order 13514, a number that I think really rolls off the tongue. And you can also visit CEQ's website. That's the Council on Environmental Quality. And there's a lot more information there, not only about what the federal government is doing in terms of its operations, but other environmental initiatives that CEQ is leading.
Those are both great, and the Department of Energy too has tips that you can take at home as well that are really good. We have a question from Mearden Thompson out of Louisville, Kentucky, who wants to know, what about green schools? Now, I know the Department of Energy is part of this, and I also know from traveling throughout the country that there are a lot of municipalities taking place in this effort. So what's being done on a larger approach with education, green schools?
So green schools are a great idea. I mean, just like for your home, just like for the commercial office buildings that the federal government is largely dealing with, by greening your school, the amount of energy and the dollars that translates into every year can help to buy 2,500 new textbooks, 250 new computers. It could even help pay for additional teacher salary. So there are a lot of really great benefits, not only for the well-being of the students and the teachers who are in those schools, but also for the school itself in terms of being able to meet the students' needs. There are tons of green schools initiatives around the country. I know that this is an idea that the Department of Education has really embraced as well. But a lot of school decision making is actually made at the local level. in some cases at the state, and in other cases at the local level for your local school board. And if you wanted to find out more information about what your locality is doing on green schools, there's a Green Schools Caucus in Congress, so your congressman may well be a member of that, helping to support ideas on the Hill. And you can also look for the Green Schools Caucus in your home state.
That's great. So this will have to be our last question because I think we're almost out of time here. But Chris Glasner, again from Washington, D.C., wants to know, what plans are there to help agencies obtain more information or resources for this green transformation?
So we've got a lot of ideas there. I'll just mention a couple of them.
Okay.
So there's actually a steering committee on federal sustainability, and there's a senior official, a senior sustainability officer who is resident at every agency who's going to be part of that group. So that's one place where we're going to share ideas. And then following on the executive order, there's a whole series of implementation instructions, guidance, and tools and resources that my office and others will be producing to help support the agencies. And just like today, and just like the Green Gov Challenge, we're very committed to that being a two-way flow of information. So not only sharing what we know, not only answering the questions that people have, but also listening for the best ideas and the best opportunities, just continuously improve the support that we're able to share with the agencies on how to implement these ideas.
Okay, so this will be our very last question, because I think this will end us on a great note. So we have a question from John Bangert, who is from Cape Cod, Massachusetts, who wants to know, will there be additional tax incentives? So, I mean, our whole effort here partially is to save tax dollars, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And so by the end of January of 2010, we'll be reporting out what the federal-wide target is for greenhouse gas emissions reductions. And as we have we're zoning in on a target for what that number is going to be for us, then we'll be able to equate that to anticipated savings for the taxpayer as well, and that will be a very exciting number to be able to report.
Great. So I think that wraps up our session today. I think we both want to thank all the Facebook users who took their time out of their day to ask us questions and be engaged in the federal government. We appreciate it. Any last words?
Just echoing Christine's sense of appreciation for everybody who joined today and shared your questions. And for those of you who are members of the federal community, we look forward to hearing lots of ideas at the Green Gov Challenge and lots of ideas from your colleagues as well.
Yes, please check it out.
Yes. Thank you.